I don't understand this stupid thing.
Hey everyone, we're live, by the way, Eric.
There.
Here, let me.
I think it found me now.
Over.
Okay, so good.
We were having some camera issues there. All we could see was Eric's hands peeking up from
I was
the
trying
netherworld.
to tell the camera I'm over here.
Man,
but it didn't work.
Gotta love AI
technology. Yeah, AI. Yeah, the promise of AI is still just that, a promise. It's not really.
Did you see? Now, this has nothing to do with Apples. It has nothing to do with Macs. Did you see the news article the other day that they estimate we are within 8 years of being able to do head transplants?
Yeah, I did see that.
Did you see that? Thanks to robotics and AI. Now, donor body. This is the future, Eric. We never have to die. We just keep transplanting our heads from new body to new body. Now,
right.
Now the bad thing is there has to be a donor body. Right.
Exactly. Which brings up the classic novel by Michael Crichton, right? Coma. Remember that? Where they were harvesting organs from bodies or whatever. So maybe that'll actually happen now. I don't. Yeah. So you need to have a body. Yeah. I think there's probably things. What's that? Another Michael Crichton, although it's a movie where the scientist says you were so consumed with whether you didn't stop and think of whether you should when they
Whether
created
you
the dinosaurs.
Yes.
Yeah, and I think that might go with this. I don't think we need that. It's
I'm
not
perhaps more interested in grafting the head onto an artificial body.
Oh yeah,
do a Picard thing.
right.
Although it wasn't his head. They didn't
Right.
move his head over to the no spoilers. They didn't move his for anyone who didn't watch Picard. They didn't move his head
Right.
over. It was more his consciousness.
Consciousness, right?
Yes.
Right. Yeah, there's been many sci-fi thing of that too, where people upload their consciousness to some computer or whatever, or their whatever. That would be kind of interesting.
Interesting. Oh man. Okay.
Yeah.
So, as I started putting together notes for this episode, I started to kind of let news items fall off to the side. But did you have any news items you wanted to discuss this week in particular, or would you like to just kind of move on to the topic at hand?
Yeah, you know what? I don't think I do. I was trying to think. There was something that kind of grabbed my attention, but it was a while ago now, and I don't know if we might have already covered it anyway. So I can't quite think of anything. So no, none.
None shall pass. The only thing that really, let's see, what caught my attention in the news. Now, because of the reaction time episode, some of this stuff is kind of old at this point, including our primary topic. But I do feel, and I make reference to this at some point in my notes, but I feel as if it's kind of a timeless topic, that this topic really has been with us for a good, 25 years. No. Yeah. 30 years.
Longer.
35 years. But let's see. Some of the news items, let's see, what has caught my attention? M4 Max, that's not interesting. This I thought was interesting. Kind of. We don't have to discuss this in the show, but I thought this was interesting. Just no matter what you say about Roku and their drive to push more advertising to our screens during downtime, one thing that they're doing is forcing or imposing new limits on autoplay. In other words, if you want to have your app on the Roku, you have to abide by a global do not autoplay setting.
Oh, nice.
Thank goodness. Thank goodness. Stupid Netflix and their seeming they don't seem to understand that we don't want a show or a movie to automatically start playing just because we want to read the description.
Right. Yes. And the way that Apple does it with their TV play, where it plays it, but it's muted, that I can almost handle. It drives me nuts though when stuff just starts playing and yes.
Or do what Paramount Plus does. Show like 15, 20 seconds and then go back to the still frame. Don't sit there and just start playing the show. All I want to do is see what the darn show is about. I don't want to start watching it. I want to just know what it is.
I know. Yeah.
Maybe I want to watch it.
Yeah.
Maybe I don't. So imposing autoplay restrictions on these app developers like Netflix is a very good thing. Let's see.
Would that actually affect that, or is it just like don't autoplay the next video after this? Like,
that's already a feature in Netflix. This is don't start playing the darn shows if someone doesn't explicitly say start playing the show.
Right, start playing the show.
So this would be a global setting. So in the main settings menu of the Roku, you can say do not autoplay. and apps will have to abide by this, which is
follow that.
Good.
Yeah.
Let's see what else is interesting. Firefox Power User keeps 7,400 browser tabs open for 2 years.
Oh my gosh! Well,
I just think that's awesome, and that's
me beat.
That's one of the keys of Firefox is how it manages the resources for every browser tab versus how, say, Chrome manages the resources for every browser tab. Firefox essentially suspends the activity on that tab, requiring very little or minimal resources of your Mac. And this proves the point. Can you imagine over 7,400 tabs open in Chrome? I don't even think you could aspire to that with Chrome. You can't even think about it without bringing your computer to its knees. And yet, here you go, 7,400 tabs. Okay, so that was an interesting article. Let's see, M3 chip is a victim of the times. Fun news, tiny Las Vegas sphere replica lights up with 945 LEDs. That was just kind of fun. Somebody built their own little mini replica of the Las Vegas sphere. You've seen that, right?
I think so. Sphere. Yeah, right.
Pretty cool until you get, if you get really close to it, it's like getting really close to an LCD panel. Suddenly the picture is really lost and all you can focus on are the dots. Well, that's kind of what the Las Vegas sphere is like too. And when you get too close to it, you really kind of lose that bigger picture, as it were. No pun intended. But so here's somebody who created their own little replica Las Vegas sphere with 945 LEDs. So I thought that was cool.
Wow, that's totally cool.
Fusion Pro 13 goes free for personal use. Awesome. That's good to know.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Somebody still to this day, complaining about the charging port in the bottom of the Apple mouse. Apple urgently needs to revisit its single worst accessory. So, look, I get it. The charging port on the bottom was
a slow news day if you got to talk about that. Yeah.
It was a dumb decision, I think. I don't.
Yeah.
But it does not make it its single worst accessory. I actually really like the Apple mouse. When I have to use another mouse, I feel hindered because of the lack of the touch abilities that you have with the Apple mouse.
Right.
Clearly, it's the single worst accessory ever.
Well, it's almost like the guy just discovered it. Yeah, even though it's been out how many years?
He just switched to the Mac and realized that the charging port was on the bottom. Yeah, it wasn't the greatest decision, but come on. 10 minutes and you're back up and mousing again.
Right.
Sad news. Apple's plastic-free packaging means pack-in logo stickers are going away. That was sad.
Yes, I saw that too. I don't think they need to do that. I think they could have kept the stickers around.
The article said that they switched to wax paper backings, but I guess the ultimate problem is that the sticker itself is made out of plastic. So you could argue, switch to a paper sticker, right? You could do that. That would lack the durability that the existing stickers have as far as putting them on car windows and things like that. But at least you could still have a sticker. Keep the spirit of the sticker alive, for goodness sakes.
Right.
Not just dump them entirely.
No.
Let's see what else is in the news. Time is running out for Windows on the Mac. Well, all these articles that talk about boot camp on Intel Macs and how sad it is that we can't do boot camp anymore and all that. Yeah, okay, fine, I get it. But who used boot camp? Boot camp was awful. I never used boot camp. Did you use boot camp?
I never did.
No, you virtualize Windows. No. You don't put it in boot camp. The problem with boot camp, and this is just, my strong soapboxy opinion on it. The problem with boot camp was that it turned your Mac into a Windows PC. It wasn't that boot camp's promise was you can run Windows on your Mac. but you completely
Right.
lose the ability to access your Mac while you're running Windows.
Running Windows. Yeah. You have to reboot. Yeah.
The boot
It's in the
camp
name.
solution
Yep.
should have always been virtualization, not running it on bare bones hardware, in my opinion.
Right.
So to me,
Yeah.
boot camp was a non-starter from the beginning.
Yeah. No, I agree. I know there was some, supposedly some advantages over virtualization. I think you could do some more native stuff. I think there was like support for Thunderbolt way back when, and the speed and all that stuff. But I mean, really, virtualization has been great, and it's only gotten better. So
Until
yeah,
Apple Silicon, now it's gotten worse. But yeah, there you go. No, it's fine as long as what you want
yeah,
to run doesn't need to be emulated versus virtualized.
right, exactly. And you're fine with running the ARM version of Windows, which I do so infrequently. It works great, by the way, but I do it so infrequently that it doesn't really matter.
And it needs to be Windows 11, which is the worst of all. Let's
Right.
see.
Okay, so here's the story.
Yes.
Windows 11. So they've been throwing updates out to it,
Yeah.
and apparently one of them is they've added sudo to it now.
I saw
To
that.
the command line, and
wait till the hackers get a hold of that.
Yeah. So one of the things is, and I'm sure you type in your password initially when you add it because it's something you have to turn on. But then from that point on, when you have to use sudo to, basically authorize a command, you just get this UC prompt and you click OK, and then it goes on, which to me defeats the whole purpose. Because I mean, the whole idea behind sudo on the on Unix and the Mac is that you type in your password. I don't know. It doesn't.
Microsoft has never really understood that sort of thing. Well, no. I mean, what do they call it? The oh shoot, when Windows pops up and says, "Are you sure you want to run this?" or whatever. There's no real security behind that. It's, are you sure you want to run this? Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. There's no putting in a password like there is on the Mac. There's no, I don't know. So why not?
It's really.
Why not extend the same lack of security to sudo? Sure.
Right.
Sure. Cool.
Sure. Yeah. Why not?
Affinity Suite 2.5 came out.
Yeah.
That was pretty cool. That. Neat updates in there.
It looks really cool. Yeah.
The QR code insertion was pretty cool. I like that addition.
Yeah.
Do you do much with QR codes?
Not every once in a while, but not really. No. I do more scanning them than I do actually making them and putting them out there. But yeah, every once in a while.
I use a really, really good app on the Mac. It took me a while to find one that was decent, but there's one in the App Store called QR Factory, and really, really like that one. I mean, it'll even let you create the QR codes with the logo in the center and different colors and gradients and all that kind of stuff. It's a neat package.
Yeah, that's really cool.
And it's pretty much a one-time purchase. QR Factory. I like that one a lot.
QR Factory.
Now, the QR code insertion in Affinity, the Affinity apps in general, is a little bit more basic. Now, you can take advantage of the functionality of Affinity Designer to add a gradient to it or outlines and, all that kind of stuff. You can enhance your QR codes, but as far as I could tell, you can't do put the logo in the center of the QR code thing like you can with something like QR Factory.
Okay.
So that was kind of cool. Oh, I also liked the ability to adjust the width of a stroke after you drew it on screen. I thought that was kind of a neat addition. So now.
Oh yes, yeah. I saw that with the eyebrows. I think that was an example.
That was cool.
Yeah, that was slick. Yeah. No, that's true.
Other news. Archie, we should just do this with news. We should just like run down the news in a very brief
Yeah,
form
no,
before we actually record the show. And then people who watch the
yeah,
live stream, we can just bore
we'll get
them
it.
with this.
Right.
And
Right.
no. We can just kind
No.
of run down quick news at the beginning. And unless it's something super important, not
Yeah.
not covered in the
We
show.
don't have to hear it. Right. No, that sounds good.
Oh, I thought this was cool. Archie, you remember Archie? Archie servers? Archie, the internet's first search engine, is rescued and running. So apparently it was this big effort to find a working copy of an Archie, the Archie server software. It was like this big search went on to do it. And I was thinking, God, I wonder if I have it on disk somewhere, because I had all kinds of different servers and
Yeah.
nobody asked me. It's probably on one of those floppy disks on the shelf in the next room. But apparently the big search went under, ironically, a big search went on to find Archie, the first search engine. And
they found it.
And they found a copy. And now it's virtualized and up and running. So good on them.
Yeah, I remember that, actually. I totally remember that, Archie. But I forgot all about it.
It's another one I haven't dug into too deeply. I just added it to the news. Why your Wi-Fi router doubles as an Apple AirTag. That was Krebs on security. Well, I'll have to read that one a little bit more before we talk about it. This other one, though, and then we'll get to the main show. This other one, why you should buy a Mac Mini instead of a MacBook Air. I think that is a great future topic for the show.
Oh, yeah.
Especially considering this episode's topic.
Right.
Why should someone consider a desktop versus a laptop? And there are many, many reasons why it's a good idea to get something like a Mac Mini or a Mac Studio or an iMac instead of a MacBook Air or a MacBook Pro. So I think that would be a good follow-up to this episode's discussion.
Yeah. Definitely goes along nicely.
Yes, it does indeed. Okay, so let's see. We should probably consider getting started. I sent you the article of note.
Yep.
What I did is, and I know you always do this sort of thing too. What I did is I picked out a few of the primary points raised within the article and figured they could be discussion points.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Basically pulled direct quotes. I have a few comments of my own. I know you'll have some thoughts on it too. And then figured that would be the discussion point. I have a brief intro to the topic at the beginning, very brief intro to the topic before jumping into it. And then on top of that, we have a listener question that I got this week that I'd like to address on the show. And then the essential app pick, which you said you could do this episode.
Yes.
Awesome. All right.
Maybe I've got a good pick.
Maybe.
Going over the apps, I was thinking, did I already do that one? Oh, I must have already did that one. So yeah, I have enough in reserve. So if I accidentally pick one that I might have already done, I have enough. I'll have another one.
I have a running list of what we've done. If you want to put it in the interview chat and not put it in the live stream, I can tell you if it's one we've done.
Oh, okay. Actually, I don't think this one we've done.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Well, if you're sure, then we'll just go with it.
Okay.
And you know what?
Okay.
As an essential app, if we have covered it before, it's no less
just
essential
means it's
than
more
it was
essential
before.
than ever.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. All right. Oh, and then I have some news to share with you, which I'll share when we're done recording.
Okay, sounds good.
It's minor news, but not something I really wanted to do, but had to do. So I'll share that with you. It'll come out on the show one of these days, but it's not in my possession yet. So we'll talk about it later.
Interesting.
Yes.
Now you've got my curiosity piqued.
Piqued curiosity. Peaked. What is the tallest peak you have ever hiked?
Oh, for me, yes. Mount Shasta easily. Just kidding.
Well, I don't know. I don't know. How tall is that? Did you hike it? Did you really hike it?
I think, or is it Mount Wilson? No, not at all. No. Probably the tallest peak is probably around 10,000.
10,000?
Back when I was younger. Yeah. And lived in California.
Somebody asked me this week 3 fun facts about Mike. It's for I'm going to be on somebody else's show in a couple weeks, and so they wanted 3 fun facts about Mike, and I don't know what fun facts are there about me. And my wife came up with a couple, and one of them was, she came up with the years. Okay, so this is a spoiler. This is a spoiler right here. But my years of playing Tetris have paid off because I'm an expert packer. Like when we go on trips, or if I have to pack a cooler or pack luggage,
right.
Or actually part of it probably came too from being a bag boy at a grocery store for a couple of years.
I bet.
You have to really become an expert at packing when you're a bag boy. But that was one of the questions.
Not anymore.
Well, no, they just wing it all into a bag.
Right.
Bread on the bottom, cans on top. Sure, why not?
Yeah, I know.
Jeez.
Yeah, there's some of these have been suspect. Some of the trips I've made lately with the baggers, but yeah. My wife was a bagger too.
We actually had training. They trained us.
Yeah, I know. That's what my wife was saying too. Yeah, and you would think that would be something they would still do, but no
need.
Yeah,
no need.
No need, I guess.
Just wing it all into those bags. Even if you bring like a somewhat rigid canvas bag, because you don't want all the plastic bags. If you bring a bag. It's like they don't know what to do with it, for one, because it's not on their little spinny thing that they just tear the bags off of and fill with junk.
Right.
So they just kind of like try to lamely hook it onto the side of their little wheelie thing with all the plastic bags, and then they just start throwing stuff into it. Like, well,
yep.
I because of the years, total rat hole here, but because of my years as a bagger and working in a grocery store, when I unpack the cart onto the conveyor belt in the order that things should go into the bags.
Like, yeah, that's smart. Yeah,
to this
my
day,
wife does
I
that
do
too.
That. Yeah.
Yeah. Yep. Nope. My wife does the same thing, actually. And I should pay more attention to that, but I don't.
Yeah.
But,
and then you watch the checker grab the bread from the back and pull it forward and scan it and throw it in, and then take the big can of beans and toss it on top of it.
You're like, no.
Like, now you're just doing that on purpose, aren't you? I mean,
right.
If you hate your job that much, you hate your job that much, maybe you should find a different one.
Yeah, exactly. This may not be for you.
That was rude. I shouldn't say that. Okay.
No, but it's true, though.
We're at 29 minutes. See, even on our most efficient days, we can still blow a half an hour. All right.
Who said anything about efficiency? We are not efficient.
We are nothing if not efficient. All right. Here we go. We're going to get started.
Let's do it.
In 3, 2, 1, It's For Mac Guys Only, episode number 433 for May 24th, 2024. The Death of Desktop. Hey everyone, welcome back to For Mac Guys Only, the show for the Mac community, where we share our thoughts and opinions on current Mac news and events. And joining me to discuss all things Mac is my For Mac Guys Only co-host, Eric Erickson. Hi Eric, how you doing?
Pretty good. How you doing, Mike? I'm here in Texas where 3 desktops have died just in the last 2 minutes while you were talking. So,
the tragedy.
Going. Yeah.
Well, we'll talk about that in just a minute. Remember, we normally record For Mac Guys Only live on YouTube the second and fourth Friday of the month. And if you would like to come hang out, ask questions, and be part of our live studio audience, be sure to subscribe to the show at youtube.com/FMEOTV so you can get notifications about when we're going live. I don't know why I said that. And if you are joining us live, I'll be keeping an eye on the chat room too. So if you have questions or comments as we move along, be sure to preface it with a Q, and we'll try to address it here on the show. Well, Eric, sometime around mid-April, there was a new editorial that appeared within the virtual pages of Macworld that didn't quite sit right with me when it proclaimed the Mac desktop was dead. Now, I don't think this is a new argument, and I wouldn't be surprised if Macworld themselves didn't make this very same argument at some point shortly after the Macintosh Portable was introduced, way back in 1989. Now,
Probably.
I could be wrong. I didn't go back and check.
Yeah.
But the very first portable Mac, and I'm sure you remember this one too, Eric, but it was a pretty cool machine. Yep. In fact, I remember being at a small computer show where the Macintosh Portable, that's what it was called, the Macintosh Portable, where that Macintosh Portable was on display, and we could go up to it and we could play around with it. And I remember thinking to myself, what a revolution it was. I mean, it was pretty nifty. Now, in truth, it actually looked very much like an Apple IIc. But unlike the Apple IIc, it had a trackball jammed in there alongside the keyboard, and then that nifty fold-down display. But do you know what I found the most fascinating? Now, if you remember it, you might have thought the same thing when you saw it. But to me, the most fascinating thing about the Macintosh Portable was that the trackball could actually be taken out and moved to either side of the keyboard. I mean, what the heck? That was awesome. You could literally
I forgot about that.
Take it out, slide the keyboard over, and put it in on the other side. I mean, even then, Apple was thinking about ergonomics. It was a pretty nifty invention. In fact, I believe you could even, I have to look this up to be sure, but I think you could take out the trackball and replace it with a numeric keypad too if you wanted to. But that was neat.
Sweet.
That was a neat feature. You know, think about someone trying to use this thing and the trackball's on the right, but you're left-handed. You need it on the left side. So what's the solution? Right. Take it out, slide the keyboard over, stick it back in again. Pretty cool. Now, very cool. Unfortunately, the Macintosh Portable, with its nearly 10-inch LCD display and its massive 40 megabyte hard drive, didn't quite take off like Apple hoped. But despite its size and weight, and it was pretty heavy, I think it was around 15 pounds, 16 pounds, something like that. Despite its size and weight, it actually was a little bit of a hit with the press. Mostly. I mean, they did take it to task for the size and weight, and they did have some complaints about the battery, but I mean, gosh darn it, this was the very first portable Macintosh. So how could it not be a hit, you know?
Right.
Now, it wouldn't really surprise me at all if those proclamations were made. No, let me say that again. it wouldn't really surprise me at all if proclamations were made that the Mac desktop at that point was dead.
Right.
And this isn't a new argument from those who rely solely upon a portable Mac. And now that we have Apple Silicon, the compromises that we always had, the disparities that we had between the desktop Macs and the portables, at least in terms of power and extensibility, they've all but vanished. When you have an M3 Pro portable Mac and an M3 Pro desktop Mac, functionally, speed-wise, memory, storage, they're all pretty much the same.
Right. Yeah.
So why not declare the desktop dead? I mean, it's no longer needed. You can have one Mac. Your entire computing existence, in fact, can be with you 100% of the time. Not unlike, let's say, an editor at Macworld. Clearly,
right,
the desktop is dead. But I thought we could go through a few of the points from the article. It was written by Roman Loyola and Michael Simon. It was a dual author article, the title of which I'm going to get to in just a moment. But I thought we could discuss a few of their arguments and share a few thoughts of our own as we go through them. So why don't we start with the title? I love this title. This is great. The title of the article was Apple Silicon was supposed to save the Mac desktop. Instead, it's killing it. After several years and few innovations, the state of Apple's desktop is bleak. Wow. I mean, I get where they're coming from, right? It's something that we've brought up on the show before, but I wonder if expectations that form the basis of the article aren't skewed a bit now that Apple's moved the Mac away from Intel and onto Apple Silicon. I mean, if you think about it, every year we get a new A-series processor for the iPhone, and every year we get a new model iPhone sporting that very chip. So why shouldn't the Mac that's now sporting the M-series processors, or system on a chip, I should say, why shouldn't the Mac be refreshed across the board as well, right? I mean, we've said it here on the show before, Eric. How hard can it be?
Right.
But I thought we should move on to some specifics. That's the title of the article. But to prove the point that Apple is killing off the Mac desktop, they actually take the approach of visiting each of the current model desktop Macs. And the first two are the Mac Mini and the iMac. But what I want to do is I want to skip over the iMac for a moment, and I want to jump to the third one, which is the Mac Studio. So I want to start with a little quote from the article here. They write, "The lack of an M3 update to the Mac Mini is confounding when you consider its past release history," which I'll get to in just a moment. When Apple introduced the M1, the Mac Mini shared the spotlight with the first Apple Silicon machines. Then when the M2 Pro arrived, Apple added a higher-end model with an M2 Pro chip as a lower-cost performance machine. Both times, the Mac Mini was at the forefront of the launch of a new chip. Then they also mentioned the Mac Studio a little bit further down in the article. The Mac Studio got an M2 Max and M2 Ultra chip less than a year ago. So, they say, an update doesn't yet feel overdue, even though high-end MacBook Pro models already have an M3 Max. But, they say, it feels like a generation could pass us by without an update. Okay, so those are the first two models that I wanted to talk about that they discuss in the article, the Mac Mini and the Mac Studio. So I thought we could look at the Mac Mini's history. So I pulled up Wikipedia, always a good source for this sort of thing, because they have those wonderful charts, those wonderful tables of every single model that's ever been released and what was included in those. Makes it very easy to track this kind of thing down. And if you'll remember, and I remember because I bought one of these, The very first model came with a PowerPC G4 in it. And it actually remained that way, receiving minimal updates through the first 3 models until 2006, when the Mac Mini jumped to the Intel Core Duo for 2 models. Then we moved to the Core 2 Duo, and we stayed there from 2007 through late 2009, at which point in 2010, not much changed at all in terms of the processor, but we moved to the unibody Mac Mini, which is the design that we still have today over 14 years later. And it wasn't until 2011 that the Core i5 made an appearance, and despite minimal bumps, in my opinion, it remained the processor of choice, with some outlying models coming with an Intel Core i3 or an Intel Core i7. It wasn't really until 2018 that we finally moved from a dual-core Core i5, and that actually surprised me a little bit as I was going through the charts. Really? It was a 2-core Core i5 all this time? Yes, it was a dual-core Core i5 all that time until we finally moved to a 4 or a 6-core model, and that was in 2018. Wow. And yet, during all that time, Eric, the Mac Mini remained a viable computer with no proclamations of death, despite minimal, though continual improvements until we made the jump to Lightspeed with Apple Silicon. Did you have a Mac Mini? Did you make those kind of jumps with it?
No. My mom did for a while. It was like one of the last Intel versions, but no, I never have.
Yeah.
I've always thought they were interesting. I've wanted them, but no.
It, like most Mac desktops, was a great little machine, and if you purchased one, you very likely kept it for several years. It wasn't something that you necessarily felt the need to run out and jump to the latest model every time a new one got introduced. And I think when you look at the release schedule of it, there wasn't a new, well, if there was a new release every year, it certainly wasn't a big jump. It was at best a gradual jump from one to the other until we hit those milestone moments, the 2010, the 2018, and then to Apple Silicon. And of course, PowerPC to Intel. That was a big jump as well.
Big jump, yeah.
But through it all, I feel anyway as if it was a generally very gradual advancement. That there wasn't any point during the Mac Mini's life where we said, oh my gosh, that was the turning point. That's when it became a real computer. No, it's been a very viable, useful computer from the moment it was introduced. Its original purpose, of course, was to be that computer that enticed people to make the leap from Windows over to the Mac. That was the whole reason for it. Yeah, it was for switchers. Yep. So I'm not sure that aspect of the argument holds up. That with the M3, with the release of the M3, that the Mac Mini is somehow way behind the times because it wasn't also simultaneously upgraded to the M3, when we've seen through history that it didn't always make that leap when a new processor was introduced. Yes, Apple had to wait for Intel, but we didn't see the Mac Mini make a jump every single time something new came out. Instead, we saw those upgrades in the iMac or in the Mac Pro. We'd see it there too for, well, at least up until 2013. we saw big upgrades there. Now, the Mac Studio, well, I have some general thoughts on that as we get to that, but I think the Mac Studio is a little too new to tell. Yes, we went from the M1 Max to the M2 Max. I don't know if jumping straight to the M3 is warranted.
No, and actually, I think there's a whole thing on that, and that article was written a month ago, but so you brought up two good points. Well, first good point was, look at this hasn't been, look at how slow to jump the Mac Mini was in the past. It's almost like since it moved to Apple Silicon, now Apple should be like refreshing all of these Macs, all the time and doing something different. Now, the one thing I will say, and I think this is kind of all panned out now, is that the M3 was just sort of like a bridge chip, and it wasn't actually something that I guess it was something that Apple wanted to get on and have the 3 nanometer process earlier than everybody else, but it was done in such a way, I guess it was using these N3B fabs or whatever, and it was something that Taiwan Semiconductor couldn't easily make, and it was more expensive and all this, that, and the other thing. And so the M3 chip was actually created without the fusion connector, so an M3 Ultra was never even possible. And I think so. There's that. Plus, the other thing is, when Apple switched to Apple Silicon, it started with the low end Macs first and the easiest, and put in the M1, and then later on came the M Pro and the M Max, and the same thing with the M2. And I think there's been discussion that they've kind of cannibalized their desktop machines with their portables by doing it that way, and that they were going to switch it the other way around and come out with, like the M4 now, because they were going to come out with maybe the Mac Studio, possibly the Mac Pro first, and then the notebooks or the laptops in the fall, and with the rest of them. So they would go from the top down rather from the down to the top or the bottom up. And it seems like that's kind of what's playing out now. The iPad got the M4, but I think that's also because it kind of just fell into the, it was, they were updating the iPad, and they weren't going to just put in the M3 when they were going to get rid of it anyway. So it kind of made sense for them to put in the M4. But I think, I don't think that the desktop is dead. And I think you're totally right in the sense that they've said that it was dead in the past, and probably when they came out with the Mac Portable way back when in '89, they said that the desktop was dead, and then when they came out with the PowerBooks after that, but the truth of the matter is there's always going to be more power and better bang for your buck with a desktop than there is going to be with a portable. And right. Even it's as fast and as awesome as these chips can get, and the ability to do stuff on a portable, on a notebook that you could only do on a desktop before, is great. But that just means the desktop's going to do even more, right. and there's going to be people that'll need that power. So, and yes, it could be niche, and maybe it isn't going to have but I don't totally agree with the article in that. Who knows? It may very well play out. Jason Snell, I think it was him. I read something he said back in 2015. He thought that the Mac was dead. Not even just the desktops. I think the Mac almost as a whole. But then Apple Silicon came out, or you heard the rumors and stuff like that, and they came out now that's changed everything. So, I think Apple loses sight sometimes of things, but then they get back into it. And I think part of it is they don't have enough staff to keep everything. They're focused on creating Vision Pro or building the Apple Car or whatever, and they lose sight of some of their traditional things that they've always been good at and that people want from them. And then they like, oh yeah, we need to build a Mac Pro, or oh yeah, we need to do that, sort of thing. So yeah, and he does make some excellent points in that article, though.
Yeah, and as you pointed out, the article is now a month old, so as they say, hindsight is 2020, and we are now reading this article and commenting on this article from the vantage point of knowing that the M4 is now out. And as you pointed out, we now also know, and I don't think we knew this, but you pointed out, rightly so, that the M3 was more of a bridge chip. And I don't know that we knew that before the M4 was released.
Not much before, no.
Yeah, it wasn't until people started questioning, well, wait a minute. We just had the release of the M3 last fall. And you told us how scarily fast it was going to be. And now you're coming out with an iPad with an M4, and the M4 Mac is nowhere to be seen. So that got people digging and questioning and wondering why this is the case. And that's when it started to come out, or at least that's when I started to read that the M3 was more of a bridge chip. And I can see why Apple would say, yeah, maybe we don't want everybody to know that while we're releasing new Macs, and, you know, they're all M3 based, and we don't want them saying, well, this is just a bridge chip. Let's just wait for the M4.
Right.
But that's a super important point to bring up. But the fact that the Mac Mini or the Mac Studio didn't immediately leap to the M4 doesn't feel all that super concerning to me. But you did mention niche machines. And one of the things that they mentioned in the article, of course, is the Mac Pro. And about that, they wrote, Apple introduced the first Mac Pro back in 2006 as an ultra high-end machine, and today it's less relevant than ever. For one, the Mac Studio is thousands of dollars cheaper and just as fast. For another, the biggest selling points, upgradable graphics and memory, went away when the M2 Ultra model was announced last June, and the only thing that separates the Mac Pro from the Mac Studio is the design, a few extra ports, and upgradable storage. So the question remains, they wrote, does anyone really care if Apple upgrades the Mac Pro or not? Well, as someone who moved from a Power Mac G5 to a Mac Pro in 2006, then a bump up to a 2012 model that I purchased used, the point isn't lost on me because now I'm using a Mac Studio. And I don't think, knowing what I know about the current lineup, I don't think I would ever look back or even consider a Mac Pro ever again. Apple Silicon simply doesn't offer what made the Mac Pro an attractive computer to me, and that was upgradability and ease of expansion. In fact, what the current Mac Pro offers, I can pretty easily replicate with an expansion chassis that sits under my Mac Studio, and it takes a mere fraction of the space. Now, I'm not the target audience for the current generation Mac Pro. I understand that. I get that. And I may have never actually been the target audience for the Mac Pro Intel or even the Power Mac G5. I may not have been that target audience. But the fact that I could open up, modify, and upgrade that computer at will was what always made it attractive to me. But what do you think, Eric? You mentioned the niche computers. Certainly the Mac Pro fits within that realm. Does anyone care if the Mac Pro is upgraded?
Yeah, I mean, that is a good question. And I think, I think now more than ever, especially with Apple Silicon, that really changed things. And the Mac Pro, as it is right now, was created and released when Intel was still a thing, and for the Intel processor. And they had some other stuff in there too. That was, I forget what it was now, but it was kind of cool that I think that the Apple Silicon basically just all erased since then. And you're right. I mean, with the SoC chips now, it doesn't really make sense. And especially if all it comes down to is design and more storage. But certainly I was one of these people that had a Power Mac G5 and then had a Mac, actually two Mac Pros after that.
Right.
and they were excellent computers because to me, first of all, they started out at a really good price. They were around 2,400 or so, and you could upgrade the memory, you could upgrade the storage and graphics cards, all that stuff, and it was just a great modular Mac tower that Apple made that was just perfect for me, even if I wasn't necessarily the pro they had in mind. And so now with the new Mac Pro, it's probably something that most people could get away with a Mac Studio, and save a bunch of money with than buy a Mac Pro. Unless that they come out with like he mentions in the article, this M4 M chip Ultra or Extreme chip that they've been kind of rumored to come out with. Again, though, unless that Extreme processor is so much faster and so much better, and it has maybe features that just are not going to be on the Ultra or less. I don't. Do you need that kind of chassis? Do you need to pay the extra money essentially for that chassis and that design, or is the studio going to be enough? It to me, like you, I've bought a studio now, and that's to me that's the new Mac Pro. I mean, it makes more sense. And yeah, exactly. And it's a perfect machine for what I needed to do. And the Mac Pro is just it's way too nice and too expensive for me to even think about. So one of the things too, I think he mentions this too with right now the ceiling on the amount of RAM. Was it the Mac Pro? Is it 512 or is it going to be 512? I don't know. But yeah, I think for the Intel machines, it was like 1.5 terabytes. You could put that much RAM in there, which is prohibitively expensive, but still you could do it. And so it's, it made more sense. Those, things have just changed enough now that it's not like it used to be with computers, as far as being able to go in there and switch things out and do whatever. It's like the same sort of thing happened with cars. When my father was young, he could make changes to the cars. They could repair engines. They could do different things. It was a lot easier to do. Now you open up the hood and you can't even hardly see where anything is, let alone grab in there and try to do something. It's like, just even replacing a headlight's kind of a deal now. And
my gosh. Yeah, headlights are the worst.
Yeah. And so it's almost, and obviously computers are going that way too, where it's just going to be less and less, buy the options you want or don't, and, and I don't necessarily like it, but I think that's probably the way it's going, even industry wide, because at the SoC chip is the SoC chip, and I think that's going to take over. That's so much more speedier than what Intel and the typical Intel AMD, the more complex chips are. And I think it's just going to be one of those things that it's going to be, whether you buy a Windows laptop or you buy a Mac, it's going to be probably ARM 64 or ARM 128 or whatever it ends up being.
Yeah. Again, you brought up a really, really good point, and perhaps the Mac Studio versus Mac Pro argument is more about naming than it is about the hardware. You brought up the price. The Mac Pro, and I will admit, the first Mac Pro I had, in fact, the Power Mac G5, was purchased by my employer. It was not purchased by me. It wasn't until the 2012 Mac Pro that I purchased it myself. And as I said, I purchased that used as a replacement for the 2006. So the initial investment in those machines was not made by me, but the initial investment was a much lower investment than what it means to purchase a Mac Pro now. Instead, the better analog is the Mac Studio. The Mac Studio, as we said a moment ago, is the Mac Pro of yore.
Yeah.
It's the replacement. It's the one that we should be putting on our desk if you use the Mac Pro the way that you and I used it in the past.
Right.
And you actually probably used it a bit heavier than I did, but regardless, for both of our needs, I think the Mac Studio is the better replacement. Now, maybe the problem, as I said, is the naming. Maybe it should have been something like the Mac Pro Mini or something silly like that instead of the Mac Studio.
Right.
I like the name Mac Studio. I think that's a great name, but that might be where the confusion is arising from. You know, it's like, well, what do I buy? Do I get a Mac Mini?
Yeah.
Do I get a Mac Studio? Do I need a Mac Pro? And maybe the Mac Pro's future is not to be dead and gone, but as you said, this alleged M4/M5/M6 Extreme version of Apple Silicon, maybe the only machine that's ever found on is the Mac Pro. And, oh, by the way, that's the only choice on the Mac Pro. There's no such thing as an M4, M5, M6 Ultra, for the Mac Pro. It's only the Extreme. That's all you can get. Then it starts to make sense. If that's what they're working towards, that makes perfect sense. When the Mac Mini the Mac Mini is a darn good machine, by the way. Now that we've moved to Apple Silicon, there's very little to separate the Mac Mini and the Mac Studio.
Yeah.
There are some separations. There are some differences.
Yeah.
But there's very little to separate the two. For many, many people, in fact, I might even argue for myself, the Mac Mini is the perfect desktop replacement. And then you have the Mac Studio if you want just that little bit more. I do question whether the extreme version of Apple Silicon, if it exists, if we ever see it, can be placed within the chassis of a Mac Studio. I mean, look at all the cooling they have in there now for the M1 Max and the M2 Max. So, or Ultra even. So I do question whether something like an Extreme could be put in there without changing the size of the chassis too much. But certainly the Mac Pro has all the room in the world for cooling in it when there's very little else to go inside that giant box.
Yeah, what was I going to say? That is... That's exactly what I was thinking of, and that's maybe what it would be, is that the Extreme would be in the Mac Pro because it will have the size for the heat dissipation and the fans or whatnot to handle it, and as well as just maybe the size of it, depending upon how big it is. But and that. And of course, you never know what new technology might come out too. But I think that would make a lot of sense. Then it would be more than just, I'm getting this Mac Pro because I love the, I love the lattice or the cheese grater look, and I love I want to put in extra drives, or whatever. Right. It's actually, it has a legit difference. I do love the design. Don't get me wrong, but you would be hard pressed to pay that kind of extra money,
just for design
over the Mac Studio. Yeah, exactly. Just for design.
Well, yeah. So let's talk about the iMac. Now, I argue, and we've both argued, I think, that the iMac is really the heart and soul of Apple's desktop lineup. And it's been that way since 1998 when it was introduced.
Yep.
Now, in the article, they say Apple updated the iMac with an M3 chip last fall. It's a nice upgrade from the M1. It's a nice upgrade from the M1 that it replaced, but it's now in the incremental update phase where new iMacs will focus on performance and not much else. Okay, side note, is that a bad thing? Okay, continuing.
Yeah.
He goes on to say that the iMac is more derivative than it is new and lacks the wild creativity it once had. And we're willing to bet, that's them saying that, we, the we, the authors of the article, are willing to bet it won't be much different a decade from now if it exists at all. Okay, now, what I find most interesting about this is actually a conversation I had with a client of mine just this last week about Windows 11 and whether it's a smart move to upgrade now or to wait until he buys a new PC with it preloaded. One of the important things about the conversation I had with him was that he doesn't like change. Most computers don't like any sort of massive disruption in the way that they use their computers or their routines. We just don't like it. We like to be able to get a new computer and keep using it like we've always used the computer before. And yet, with every major release of Windows, we have had what?
Huge
disruption, major disruption every single time. And it almost feels as if it's just something Microsoft wants to do. Like, I don't know if it's deliberate. It must be to a certain extent, like somewhere in the back of their Microsoftian brains, they're like, ha ha ha, we're going to disrupt the way people use computers yet again. But
I think there's still, I don't want to say Apple envy, but I think they still have, they still are out there to find this killer operating system. I don't know. I'm not, just the UI they're going to do it. And even if they have to change it every, 100 days and get everybody mad, they'll find it,
The thing is, they finally find one that works. They finally find one that everyone loves, and they change it.
Like, I know.
What is the number one complaint when people move to Windows 11? Where's my start menu? What was the number one complaint when people moved to Windows 8? Where's my start menu? And they bring it back, and then they take it away. And then they bring it back, and they take it away.
Dudes,
this is what people want. Whether you like it or not doesn't matter. What do the people who use your operating system want? I think that's kind of key to the whole thing. And yet they don't seem to recall or remember that this problem happens every time they try to get rid of it.
And
I'm not saying it's the best thing in the world. I'm not saying the start menu is the be all and end all, but it is what people expect, and it's what people want. It was there in XP, it was there in 7, it was there in 10. Every time
it was there in 95.
It was there in 95. You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
It was there in 95 and 98. But when they try to take it away, what happens? Nobody upgrades. Nobody wants it. Everybody complains. Everybody gets third-party, apps to replace the start menu to put it back the way it used to be. Good gracious, Microsoft. Come on. Just let people use the computer they want to use. Okay, now, then I mentioned the Mac. So we talked about Windows. We talked about that familiarity. We talked about disruption. We talked about the fact that there will be some learning, some changes to how Windows 11 works versus 10. Not that he couldn't get used to it, not that he won't get used to it, but that is the change that he said he didn't want, that he needs to expect. So I suggested that perhaps he wait until he gets that new computer. I also suggested he look at a Mac, because that's where I really think he should be looking. That is what I think fits his workflow. That's what I think fits best with the types of apps that he uses. So that's another conversation. And I said, let's take a look at the very first release of OS X back in 2001. And then let's look at Mac OS 14 in 2024. My argument is that someone who is using that very first release of OS X, who was plucked from time and dropped in front of a modern Mac, would, for the most part, I think, feel right at home and could begin using it.
Yeah.
I don't think there's a huge learning curve. There are arguably differences. There are things that have changed. There's some really nice novel changes, like Spotlight, right? That's a great change. But for the most part, it's pretty much the same. Not a whole lot different.
you could go back to 1984. I mean, you could go back to the classic Mac. The Finder is really the Finder. I mean, yes, there are differences and there are changes, but like you said, you could pluck somebody out, drop them in front of it, and they'd say, "Oh, this looks like something I'm already familiar with."
Already familiar with it.
Exactly.
In fact, I did make that argument with them too. I said, go back to the Macs from well, I think I said 1984. I said, go back to them. And that general feeling, that general way the Mac worked, yeah, there are differences. You know, if you plop yourself into a System 7 or System 9 emulator, you're like, oh wait, that's right. This is how we had to do it then. But for the most part, it's the same. Now, take someone who is using Windows. Take someone who is using Windows 95 or 98 or XP, which was the new darling from Microsoft in the fall of 2001. The same time that the first version of OS X came out, Windows XP was the new operating system. They came out within a few months of each other.
A few months, yeah. Yep.
Pluck that user from time and drop them down in front of a Windows 11 computer, and they'll get it to work for the most part.
Yeah.
But that consistency of operation, that learning curve, that how much time it's going to take them to get used to using the new version of Windows, it just isn't there. They're just not going to be able to pick it up and start being productive right away. There's going to be a fairly decent learning curve from Windows 95 or Windows XP to Windows 11. And the only reason is not because of Explorer changes. It's not because of file system changes. It's not because of the types of apps you run. It's because of the way that Microsoft changed how you interact with Windows. That's it. It's that consistency of experience. And that's something that Apple has done really, really well with Mac OS through all the years.
Yes.
Now, I say all of that because when you look at the iMac of 1998, and then you look at the iMac of 2024, two wildly different versions of the iMac. But when you look at those two, there is definitely change. There is definitely innovation. But overall, I think that look and feel remains more or less the same. In fact, I would argue that the G4 iMac looks more like a 2024 iMac than it does the 1998 iMac.
Yeah.
And you can really see it when you look at them in profile. Take a profile look of the G4 iMac on up to the 2024 iMac. There really isn't that much difference between them in terms of the overall look and feel of it.
And I think that was what's his name, Roman Loyola. That was one of his points too, was that the iMac hadn't really changed since 2004 or whatever. But like you said, I think that's a good thing. I think once you hit upon a really good design, you don't change that. I mean, there's a reason why, Porsche has a real similar design or the other cars too, and why some of the American cars went back to more of a retro design, like the Mustang and the Charger, and all, because that's what looked good. They already hit upon a good design.
They figured it out.
Yeah. And it's not that you can't change things and have little differences and all this stuff, but it just makes sense to leave it. If you don't fix it,
don't fix it if it ain't broke.
Yeah.
And what I was latching on to was when the article said that the iMac is more derivative than new and lacks the wild creativity it once had. And so saying all this, my question is, do we need the iMac of a decade from now to exhibit wild creativity and design? Or are we okay with it continuing to be that same evolution of where we are now?
Yeah.
I don't get the wild creativity. I understand the differences, and you can certainly look at that G4 iMac and say, oh my gosh, this thing was just an amazing piece of engineering. And it was.
Mm.
And I
Yep.
think you could take that G4 iMac, put Apple silicon guts in it, plop it on the desk of any modern computer user, and they'd say this was a fantastically wonderful 21st century computer. I really
Yeah.
do. It
I
was
really do
a
too.
wonderful design.
Yes.
But in profile, and even from a front view, it pretty much feels the same as an iMac now.
Yeah. And I think that's a good thing. I really do. I actually do not have a problem with that. My daughter actually had a 2006 iMac, so it was I would think it was a Core 2 Duo,
The white
maybe.
polycarbonate.
Yeah, the white polycarbonate. It was
Is that what it
beautiful.
was?
It actually had
Yeah.
like a little remote, and it had the front row, and she used that to watch movies, and it was just a terrific, wonderful Mac. And I hated to get rid of it. I gave it to somebody um, who wanted a computer for his kids too, but it just was a beautiful computer. And you know, I think, and like I said, my mom actually has the latest M3 iMac, the blue version, and it's a terrific computer. It's
Yeah.
it does actually, and I think the iMac, and apparently they're not going to come out with a 27-inch iMac. I've said this before, and I think what happened, so people were buying iMacs and the higher level iMacs, the more prosumer versions, because there was no Mac Pro anymore
Right.
to get. And I think Apple was probably working on a new iMac, and then it decided that, you know what, I think they probably had heard the call for, like we had said, to the mid-range tower sort of thing, and they came out with the Studio display and the Mac Studio instead. And to me, as much as I love the iMac, this is perfect. It's exactly what I want, and it works well for me. And
Yeah.
so uh, I like being able to use a different monitor with the Mac if I want to, and yeah, it's great. And yet they found a spot for their iMac as well.
And I might have been confusing the 2006 iMac. I think it said polycarbonate. I'm not sure if that's right. The MacBook was right, but I don't know if the iMac was.
You,
I have to look that up.
no, the iMac was polycarbonate as well.
It
It was
was.
the white. It was pretty much the same as the G4.
Yeah.
I think in look and material and everything. It didn't really change, I think, until to aluminum glass until like 2008. I think
Well,
that was the first.
if you would like one of those 2006, 2007 iMacs, I have one at the office, so I'll ship it down
Do
to
you?
you. But a good point about the iMac. I have a 27-inch iMac at the office. I love it. I love that screen size. I always
Yeah.
felt as if the 21.5-inch was just a little on the small side. But to be fair, I use a 24-inch display here on my Mac Studio, and
Right. Right. That's a
it's
good
a good
size.
sized display. And
Yeah.
I feel as if Apple found that sweet spot for the iMac at 24 inches, sitting between the
Yeah.
old 21.5-inch and the 27-inch. They found that sweet spot that most people are pretty comfortable with,
Right.
and that's why
Right.
they went with it. And then to your
Yep.
point, the Mac Studio is the old 27-inch iMac. It is the
iMac.
replacement
Right.
for that. Get that.
Yep.
Get this studio display. Is that what they call it? Get
Studio. Yeah.
get the
Studio
studio
display.
display and the Mac Studio, and you've got your prosumer or pro level iMac.
iMac. Yep.
And yeah, that's got to be their thinking in terms of how they all fit within the lineup.
Yeah. That's my thought anyway.
But let's move on to a couple broader points raised in the editorial before we wrap things up. And I think I'm going to start with this one. They wrote, with Apple Silicon, desktop Macs should be on the same cadence as Apple's laptops, but it's clear that desktop Macs have taken a back seat. Is it? Is it clear? Have desktop Macs taken a backseat, which is a term that they used a few times throughout the piece.
Yeah.
I would argue that the only reason Apple hasn't updated the desktops is that they don't have a reason to. I mean, remember the M1?
Right.
Remember how flippin' fast the M1 was? How reviewers were doing backflips over how fast that M1 was over, say, an Intel Core i5? Well, guess what? It still is. Is the M3 faster? Yes, of course it's faster. But are the folks who are using an M1 iMac going to notice that much difference between it and the M3? I think in some cases they will. And in some cases, in many cases, in most cases, I would even argue, they won't. I don't think they're going to see or notice the difference between the M1 and the M3 in daily usage. And I wonder if maybe that's the key to Apple's plans. Treat the various model Macs like they treat older model iPhones. Older tech, but very viable tech. Tech that will suit the needs of the person who chooses that particular model of Mac just fine. What do you think? Your mom got an M3 iMac. Would she be happy with an M1?
Oh, yeah. Oh, for sure. Yeah, it's I think totally. Like you said, there isn't. I mean, there is a reason to upgrade, but there isn't either. You know, I mean, it's not. And again, I think some of this quote unquote cadence that they talk about, I think it's because of the way they started it rolling, the way they started Apple Silicon rolling, and I think they're switching it back now, and so they've held off updating some of these desktop Macs until, the M4 or whatever, and they get it rolling. But I think it's going to reverse. I really do. I think we're going to see the desktop, the more expensive desktop Macs get updated first, and then the laptops. And now on the other hand, the iMac, I think it's probably one of those consumer Macs that made sense for them to update to the M3 because they skipped the M2, and it probably falls into a certain sales, and of course only Apple knows how much it sells, but I think it's different. It's their one Mac now that has a screen. It used to be they had more Macs, I think, with screens than they did without.
Right.
I think the Mac Mini and the Mac Pro were the only ones that did. But now the iMac is like the only one. The Mac Mini, like you said, you could, ratchet that up with the options and get up to a Mac Studio level. So there's different things people can use Mac Minis for, whether it's a server farm or media or whatever, not to mention just, I think it has the Pro level chip in there as well. And so I think those, along with the Mac Studio and Pro, whatever, makes sense to wait, in the M3 to, and if the M3 sits on the iMac for another year or two, I seriously don't think anybody's going to care. I just don't, because I think that type of Mac is for a different kind of user. That if you, and the truth of the matter is, you can edit movies just fine on an M3 iMac. Now, I haven't, exactly tried it, but I bet I could. I bet I'd probably be like, wow, this actually works pretty good, And so it certainly is plenty fast for what, as far as the general purpose computing, and that's really what the iMac is. It's more of I don't want to say a casual user, but a typical, family user that, I do some word processing, I do some emails, I surf the web a lot. I watch YouTube, I watch Netflix, whatever, that sort of thing. It's perfect for all of that, and you don't need more than that.
I've set up a couple M1 iMacs for clients since they got released, and there was only one time I really felt it drag, and it was when this client had a massive photo library, and they opted to save a little money and not upgrade to the 16 gig of memory on it.
Oh, yeah.
And it was when working with this massive photo library that I could I could feel it drag a little bit. But then, to be fair, you would get that same sort of drag on an Intel iMac if you
Right.
didn't properly spec it out to handle the type of load you're going to be throwing at it.
Yeah.
And to your point, the M1 iMac, eight core GPU, 8 core CPU, would be a fantastic Final Cut editing machine. In fact, I seem to
Yeah.
recall early reviews pointing out what a great Final Cut editing machine it was. So
Yeah. Yep.
it
Yes.
it's really no different now than it was 3 years ago. It's
No.
just as capable, just as powerful as it was. And I recently had
Yep.
cause to see how an M1 iMac, not an M1 Pro, not an M1 Max, an M1 iMac compared to an Intel Core i5 4-core iMac. It was nearly double the processing power of
Yeah.
that Core i5
Yeah.
iMac. From that standpoint alone, it's a no-brainer. Now put an M3 in it, or
Yeah.
heck, an M2. It's going to be a computer that's going to hold someone for several years, or until Apple
Easily.
decides they don't want to support it anymore.
Yep. No, that's exactly right. In fact, actually, that was kind of the thing. It was sort of she had a Intel Mac Mini, and it wasn't that old, but I said, you know, these iMacs are really great. They just updated them to the latest chip. I said maybe you should look and see what we can trade in this Mac Mini for. And I think they gave her like $260 or something like that.
Wow.
And so it ended up working out pretty well. So, it was perfect for her. So, and I know she'll have it for quite a while.
Well, I want to wrap up with a few of their final observations, one of which is I'd say it's one of their less cheery observations. But the first of which is one that I actually agree with. They wrote, desktop Macs take a backseat to the MacBook lineup because laptop sales dominate the market, and people generally don't upgrade desktop Macs as frequently. Now, moving on, they wrote, Apple's current desktop lineup offers great designs and features, which seems to be in contrast to what they wrote earlier, but we'll move on. Even if it's mostly comprised of M2 chips that are relatively dated. I don't know how dated they are. The M3 just came out last fall, but sure,
I know.
Let's go with relatively dated. The final one is the rather bleak observation. Apple still makes desktop Macs, but the waiting game for updates is longer and more uncertain than ever. Again, not so sure about that. And they say, with very little on the horizon, it's just a matter of time before they're gone forever. Gone forever, Eric. Well,
so hold on to your Mac desktop as long as you can, because they're going to be gone.
I don't know about that, but I definitely agree that in general, folks who use desktop Macs upgrade them far less frequently than those who use laptops. Even when they're used in combination, laptops are upgraded far more frequently. And at least in my case, the ratio of replacement laptop to desktop works out to be roughly 3-to-1. I was thinking about that. It's roughly 3-to-1. I replace laptops versus desktops. So my desktop Macs generally get replaced on a roughly 8 to 10 year cycle, and laptops generally get replaced on a 3 to 6 year cycle. So, somewhere in that 3-to-1 range, but I definitely replace laptops far more frequently. Now, there's various reasons for that. Much of it has to do with the limits on upgradability. Much of it has to do with the fact that they're portable machines. They get carried around all the time. They get damaged. They get banged around. Screens break. I've been fortunate to not have screens break, but I've also been unfortunate enough to have 2 different Apple laptops video cards fail on them. And when something like that happens, outside of warranty, there's very little you can do but to replace it. Now I know that's going to be the same with Apple Silicon desktop Macs as time goes on. If there's some major hardware failure with it, there's very little you can do to replace and or fix it other than replace the machine. But the point is, I personally replace laptops far more frequently than I replace desktops.
Yeah.
I'll even admit I'm an outlier. I know folks who upgrade their laptops nearly every single year. And yet, those same folks, if they even use a Mac desktop, they hold out far longer. So the latest and greatest silicon pushed to the desktop becomes far less of an issue for them. And I think Apple knows that.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you're exactly right. And it's funny too, because, I don't want to say pound for pound or maybe, byte for byte, the desktop machines are a much better bang for the buck than laptop, especially because, some of them don't come with screens and you're not paying for that. But I think you made a good point that lugging them around and stuff like that, something's more apt to happen. And I think there's probably just a lot of people that, I should say for most people, their portable, their laptop Mac does for them everything that they want it to do.
Yeah.
And there's not the reason for them to upgrade a desktop, because they don't want to just sit there at their computer in one room. They want to take their computer with them and use it in different spots, and it does everything they need it to do, you know? And so, I totally agree with that.
Well, I don't know if you have any other thoughts on the topic, Eric, but if you don't, I just wanted to wrap up by saying, personally, I know this has been going through the back of my head the whole time I read this article and the whole time we've been talking about it today, but I do think that treating the Mac desktop like this in the age of Apple Silicon may be a mistake, and I think it may be a big one. And in that regard, I do agree with the author of the article, but I certainly don't feel it means the death of desktop by a long shot.
No.
But I do feel it represents a different approach.
Yeah. And I guess we'll have to see, the next month or two will really be telling. And either they will reveal, release Mac Studio M4 version and maybe an M Pro or whatever, and as well as a Mac Mini, or they don't. And this article is more right than it is wrong, and that's, something we're going to have to obviously see. So
we will eat our words if that happens.
Yeah. Yes, exactly.
Now we actually have a listener question this episode. This came in last week. It's kind of an interesting question. It's from listener Nick. He wrote in, it's not actually Apple related directly, but he purchased a new security camera, and he wrote, I purchased a wild camera, the Reolink Go Ranger PT. Reolink allows you to send parallel photos and videos to their cloud server, which costs extra per month. Or they give you an option to upload to an FTP server of your own choice. I guess, he says, Apple doesn't allow you to transfer anything via FTP to an iCloud account, in other words, to iCloud Drive, which would be my best option, he writes. FileZilla Pro, however, transfers to OneDrive, Google Drive, Dropbox, etc., but not to iCloud. Any advice on which storage app you would use, bearing in mind 80% of my devices use Apple and 20% are using Microsoft? Okay. All right. Yeah. So it was an interesting question. The real problem here is that devices like standalone security cameras don't really offer much in the way of extra features. It's usually you get what you get. And it sounds as if this particular camera, which I wasn't familiar with, but this particular camera is more than happy to let you use your own storage as long as it's available via FTP. That's what I gathered from his question.
Right. That's what it sounds like.
Now, yes, FileZilla Pro connects to Dropbox and to OneDrive and to, other cloud services. And so does Transmit, by the way. But Dropbox and the others don't offer FTP. It's a different way of communicating with those services. They use Dropbox's protocol, or they use, OneDrive's protocol. They don't use FTP. And by they, I mean FileZilla Pro and Transmit don't use FTP to communicate with Dropbox or OneDrive or what have you. They're using the protocol of that service to communicate with them. So while you can connect to Dropbox with FileZilla or Transmit or whatever, they're using that dedicated protocol. So I think that Nick is going to find that most of the standard cloud services will not actually be a good solution if the camera requires an SFTP server or FTP server. Preferably use SFTP because it's a secured file transfer protocol versus an open, unencrypted file transfer protocol. Now, I did know from past use that Box.net offers FTP to select paid accounts. So not to the free accounts, but to their paid accounts, they offer it. So that might actually be an option for you. If you're looking for a third-party cloud storage service, take a look at Box.net if you don't mind paying for the service, because their paid service does actually offer, or did offer, an FTP upload option. Now, I should probably mention at this point that in my reply to Nick, my next bit of advice was off a bit, because I didn't realize at first that this camera uses cellular data only. In other words, it's not running off his local network. But since many other cameras do actually run off the local network, I'm going to go ahead and share my original replies. And the first one of those replies was, can you transmit the images to a folder on your Mac over the network? Now, again, with this particular camera, I realized after the fact that you can't. But if you can transmit the images to a folder on your Mac over the network, like, via SMB, for example, well, then you could create a shortcut or an automator action that moves everything from the folder that the camera uses to your cloud service of choice. Or in fact, you probably even could just just have it uploaded straight to iCloud Drive or to Dropbox or whatever, if you can connect to your Mac via SMB. So that would be an option that you could do. And if you don't want to do it with Automator or shortcuts, well, there are plenty of third-party apps that will do that sort of thing too. Now, if that's not possible, my other suggestion was, what about setting up a simple FTP server on your Mac? Now, you would want to make sure that it's only available to your local network and not exposed to the internet, but that would be another way of getting files over to the Mac. Then, once they're there, you can still use an automator action or a shortcut or something like that to move the pictures to your cloud storage service of choice. Now,
I think that would be the best.
You would think, right?
Way. Yeah.
Now, I mentioned while you had stepped away, Eric, it was at this point that I realized neither of those solutions was going to work, because the camera in question is cellular only. It does not connect to the local network. So I actually sent a follow-up email to Nick where I said that considering the camera is not located on the local network, maybe the easiest option would be to sign up for inexpensive web hosting. Just about any reputable hosting company is going to offer some sort of FTP or preferably SFTP service. So just reach out to the host, explain you're only planning to use FTP, and then they can help secure the HTTP or the web aspect of their hosting so that people can't, otherwise browse your files. You want that secured down. You want that locked down if you're not running a website on the service and you're only using FTP. But that would be another option. And in reply, Nick said, hey, it turns out that his hosting company for his website does offer FTP, and that's exactly what he's going to do. So the big bummer here was that the camera, at least in terms of my reply to Nick, the big bummer was that it's not on his local network. It's on a cellular network, so it's on a completely separate network from his Mac. And so some of those early options don't apply, but they would apply when someone is using a camera that connects via Wi-Fi or Ethernet or something like that to the local network. So that's a few options anyway, and I think the FTP service in this particular case is the best way to go.
Yeah, and you know what? I guess now that I think about it, I have heard of cellular only cameras, but it's been a while. That does sound interesting, actually. I should check into that. Actually, that's not a bad idea. I don't know what the cost is, extra, but that does seem interesting.
I imagine if it's a data only plan, you could probably, I guess every carrier is different, but if you can get a $10 plan for your iPad as a tack on to your regular cellular service, why couldn't you get a $10 add-on plan for a camera?
Right. Seriously.
It kind of seems maybe
like isn't going to use that much data.
Or just tell them you're using an iPad. Don't tell them it's a camera and just plug it in. I don't know. That seems like that. But I think if you go into your carrier and say, hey, this is what I'm planning to do, they'll probably say, sure, we can set you up with that, and this is what it would be per month. Yeah. But you have to have a regular phone plan with us first, I would think.
Right. That's probably, yeah. You know what? I don't know. Because, I guess it depends upon, because this was back in the day that I would get like a Verizon MiFi or something, one of their little modems. And,
hotspots.
At the time, I think it was, hotspots. It was like a 3G thing. And I didn't need to have I did not need to have a phone plan with them to get that. So it may just depend upon what it is.
Yeah.
And of course, maybe that's changed too now.
What it is and what you're willing to pay for.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly.
That's why my mind immediately jumped to all these local network solutions, because it just never occurred to me that the camera would be cellular only. And
I know.
It was only after I replied initially that I realized, actually, I looked up the camera and realized that it was cellular only and went, oh, well, none of that advice I gave him is going to work. So
it's going to help.
What would work for Nick? And that's just exactly as it says on the tin, FTP only. If you have an FTP server or access to an FTP server, there you go.
Go for it.
Don't recommend running an FTP server on your Mac and opening it to the open internet. But if you have a camera on the local network and that's your only option, you could do it on the Mac and just make sure it's just exposed to your local network and those ports aren't open to the outside world.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Right, exactly. Yeah.
So, Eric, in January, we did our annual Essential Apps episode, and we had so many apps to talk about, we decided we were going to try to do a new Essential app every episode for the rest of the year. And we've done quite a few good ones. If anyone's interested, you could just click on the show notes for any of the episodes we've done since, and I list there in the links, this episode's Essential app. And I understand you have an Essential app you would like to share with us this episode.
I do. And like I had mentioned earlier, I don't believe I've shared this one before, but it's something that I've kind of come to rely on for a while now. And it's sort of kind of like, I was trying to think of what a good comparison would be, but it's sort of like maybe a modern version of Stickies or the sticky notes. But anyway, it's an app called Tot, and it's TOT. And they now have versions for just about every device, and I think there's actually a cost to for each app, but it's a one-time thing. So if you can get it for the Mac, you can get it for the iPad and the iPhone, or iOS and iPad OS, whatever. And but it's pretty slick. And what it is just this little notepad that hangs up on your menu bar, and the icon for it is like a circle. And when you click on the circle, it pops down in Notepad, and there's on the menu bar, there's like essentially seven dots. They're different colors. So it kind of starts off from like an amber yellow to orange to like a pink to purple to blue to like a teal, and then ends up with green. And each one of those is a spot for you to put notes, and it basically kind of works with Markdown. And once you've put text into a dot, I think it actually shows that it's full as opposed to hollowed out, and it also shows that it's full when you've selected that particular dot. But once you've put text in each one of those dots, each one of those pads, you need to, in order to use a new one, you there is no new ones. You have to delete everything or move it off of there and put it someplace else. So it's really a temporary storage sort of thing.
Oh, interesting.
But the Mac is just got, or the app has just got a really nice look to it, and it's easy to use. There's very little friction. And the other thing is you can pull the tab, the popover window that comes down when you click the icon up in the menu bar. You can actually pull it off the menu bar, and then it shows as a separate window. And the cool thing is when you do that, and I've seen another app do this too, but when you do that, it like runs in foreground mode. It actually brings up, so now I can see on the menu bar, I can see Tot as if it was a legitimate app, as opposed to just running in the background and not actually having. Usually you have apps that run in the background, and therefore you don't get the menu bar controls and all that stuff. With this one, when you pull it off of the little, I should say, the little icon off the top, then you get that. Otherwise, it just runs in the background. So then if you wanted to go back to running in the background, you can just hit the little close window, X, or hit Command W, whatever, and then it just goes back to running into the background again. But that's kind of a slick little deal. And then, so when you pull it off the menu bar and you have it as an actual window with, running as a legitimate app, you can Command Tab to it from another, application, just like you would any other foreground application. And the icon that shows up in the little app switcher thing shows you, like right now I'm in the orange tab, so it shows an orange icon, with an orange dot to show. Now it's going to do, I think it's, I have to make sure it doesn't set me up here. Oh, look at that. Stupid AI. Exactly. So anyway, you can have it go into foreground or background and have it tell you which dot that it's in when it's running in foreground. It's super slick, and it's made by, I think it's made by the Icon Factory, I'm going to say.
Oh, yeah. Icon Factory.
Yeah. And they've got some really cool apps, and they're very good designers too. And this just reeks of really good design, typically great Mac design app. So, and they've got, like I said, they've got one for the iPhone and an app for the iPad, and they're all consistent looking, and they all sync with iCloud in between.
Oh, nice.
It's sweet. So your notes all stay together. So
one thing I think I heard you say, correct me if I'm wrong, but there's a limit to the number of notes you can keep in it. In other words, you can only keep as many notes as you have the little colored tabs. Is that right?
Dots. Yep. And there's only 7 dots, so 7 colors. I've kind of wished that they would add more, and maybe they will, but I think part of it is they're trying to be minimalistic and simple and not get carried away. However, me being sort of, I don't like things all spaghetti together, so it would be kind of nice to have a new dot, and eventually you'll probably run out of the colors too, but still,
Well, I was going to say what I like about that is if you have ever seen one of my desks or if you see my desktop on my Mac, I tend to accumulate notes. Like I have little
Yeah.
notes all over the place. And I
Yeah.
also have taken to using TextEdit as kind of an ersatz notebook slash sticky note type thing. And we'll
Yeah.
have a bunch of TextEdit windows open in the background all the time on my Mac, each with different notes in them and all that. And then
Yeah.
I also use the Notes app. So I've got these things all over the place. And the biggest problem with that, and I've never been really good with using reminders. I'm trying to get better with using reminders. I've never really
Yeah.
been good with that. I tend to forget that they're there, if you will. And then I'll
Yeah.
go back to my reminders list and say, well, I finished that, and that. Oh, I got to add this, add this, add this.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
I've never been good with reminders. I'm obviously terrible with notes all over the place. Something like that where there's a limit, it's kind of like a combination of reminders and stickies in that once you
Yeah.
hit that limit, you have to finish or take action on one of them in order to free up
Do
space
something.
for another one. So from that standpoint,
Right.
it seems to me like it would be a very good productivity tool in that I have to finish these things so that I can add another thing. So I
Right.
kind of
Yeah.
like that actually. And
In that
then
sense, it's really good. Yeah.
yeah, and the other thing I
Yeah.
liked is that you mentioned it's stored in Markdown, which is a nice open format for your notes so that you're not locked into the app. And I think that that's a very nice
Right.
feature as well. So not only are you limiting me on how many notes I can take or how many stickies I can keep, but you're also allowing me to do it in a way that if I want that portability, if I want to take those notes and do something else with them, take some sort of action with them or move them to another type of application later, I can do so and not have to go through some weird copy, paste, export, import, whatever function. I can just bring them over
Right.
because they're in Markdown,
Bring them over. Yes.
which is great.
Yep.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's a great
Nope.
choice.
That's exactly right.
Is it I think you said, is it a paid app or a free app?
It's a paid app, and I don't remember. It might have been a little pricey. It might have been like $19. 10 a night. I can't remember, but like I said, it's a one-time deal, so you're not paying a subscription, and I really actually appreciate that because
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's some apps I'm more than fine paying a subscription for, but at some point it gets to be too much. So
Well, it gets to be too much, and then there are some apps where you don't need the continual upgrades. I mean,
right,
there's a
right,
limit to functionality for the type of app that it is. I was just
yes,
thinking about Transmit. We mentioned Transmit a little while ago.
exactly,
Transmit is a fantastic app, and I was more than happy to pay for it. I think it's around 45, $50, something like that. More than happy to
yeah,
pay for it because I use it all the time. But then again,
right,
the reason I was thinking about it is there hasn't been an update to Transmit in quite some time.
time,
So
yeah,
if I were
yep,
subscribing to Transmit, they would either be forcing updates on me just to make it feel like I was getting some sort of value out of it, or
right.
I'd be paying a subscription fee for something that was not getting updates.
It
So
was not getting updates.
I
Yeah,
think it really depends on the type of app, and that's something that developers need to pay a little bit more attention to. Not only the value of their app is super important, but the long-term prospects for upgrading the app, for providing additional value as time goes on, and then also the needs of their end user. And it sounds like Icon
right.
Factory has done a good job of making that decision when it came to pricing
Yeah,
their apps.
yeah, very much so. Yep.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, then with that, we're going to wrap up this episode of For Mac Guys Only. I hope everyone enjoyed it. Remember, I do love to get your letters, so if you have any comments about the show, a tip to share, or a software or hardware problem with your Mac, or you want to leave any comments about any other happenings in the world of Apple, you can leave your thoughts in this week's show notes found at formaceyeesonly.com, or you can drop me a line, mike@formaceyeesonly.com. And be sure to subscribe to the show's YouTube channel at youtube.com/FMEOTV and click the little notification bell so you can find out when we are going live. You can join the chat room and you can catch all the behind the scenes stuff that doesn't make the final cut of the show. Eric, what's the best way for folks to reach you?
As usual, the best way is eric@formaceyeesonly.com.
Awesome.
It's the single best way.
Thanks so much for listening, everyone. Thanks to Eric for joining me this episode. Stay subscribed, and we'll talk to you next time.
Cue the music.